Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. And this week, we're going to talk about enhancing first-party native authentication um, in native applications. And we have with us guests Godwin and Rafat. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Hi, hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
And maybe before we just dive into this topic, I will just get some quick intros. Can we start with Rafat, the guest of honor? How do you find yourself in an Identirati Office Hours live
Yeah.
stream?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah. So, my name is Rifat Sheikh Youssef. I am a director of engineering with EY as part of the consulting division, and I'm based in Ottawa, Canada. I've been with EY for about over a year now, and before that, I used to work for Auth0 for about 3 years, and before that, Nortel and Avaya in the telecom industry, so for about 15 years, and so on, right? Beside that, I'm also active with the IETF standard body. If you're not familiar with the IETF, is that the main standard body that defines all the protocols for the internet. And at the IETF, I chair the OAuth work group, which is at the heart of the identity space these days. And that's the reason I'm here. Mike graciously invited me to this this session here, and thanks, Mike, for inviting me. Happy to
And
be
there
here.
are so many OAuth specs too to
Yeah,
keep
yeah,
up with, and we're going to discuss one that's not even a spec; it's still in the embryonic stages. Godwin, how did you end up turned into identity and being an expert in OAuth?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me, Mike. I'm working in the WSO2 as the solution architect. So before moving into the solution architect, I was part of the engineering team of the identity and access management product. So that is where I started the identity and access management side. But before joining into the WSO2, I was working with some of the security stuff related to the smart card security, a contactless security side. That is where I was working with. Then once I moved into the WSO2, I started the journey with the identity and access management, and now it's almost about 10 years in the company, working in the same stream. Yeah.
You know, we have a talk coming up on July 2nd about a smart card that's both physical and logical. So that industry continues to evolve and do interesting things. But today we're going to talk about OAuth. And why don't we just start from sort of the level set? What is mobile developers' experience with using OAuth for authentication? And so what were some of the good things and bad things about it before the spec came about?
Yeah, so the how we see this problem is, we are living in a world where the end consumers are demanding lot of user experience. So there are many statistics shows the consumers are moving away from the some of the applications, based on the user experience. In that user experience, we see that identity and access management also has a critical part, especially coming to the registration, authentication, account recoveries, etc. So ultimately, this experience needs to be built by the developer. So product owners are having the lot of responsibility to build a better user experience product, and that pressure goes ultimately into the developers. So that is how we see the current state. We have been getting this request from the customers and the prospects for longer time, like how to build the native experience. So some of the developers basically going with the existing redirection approach without doing any compromises for the security. but some of the developers, they're trying to do different type of implementations. We have seen like some of the proprietary implementations. Some are basically extending the existing password grant types and adding the multi-factor authentication around it. Some are adding web views, etc.
Guilty.
Yeah, lot of innovative stuffs, right? So that is where the state. So the problem is which is sometimes compromising the security. So yes, we need the better user experience, but we are sometimes compromising the security. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rafat, you've helped so many businesses, at EY, both large, small, public, and private. Does this challenge pattern match with some of the challenges you've seen with clients and mobile apps?
Yeah, so it does. Like maybe just to add a little bit more to what Goodwin was talking about. So the current experience today is that to make sure that the security of the solution is not compromised, the user will have to, in a mobile app experience, they will have to authenticate with the authorization server through the native browser, right? So they have to switch the native browser and then switch to that mobile app, and that user experience is kind of suboptimal, right? And we've seen this with many of our customers. They don't like this. They would like that user experience to stay with the mobile application and not do that switching to make sure that the user experience is seamless, right?
Right. And I can also verify, as somebody who worked in this area, that it's even worse than that, because when you go into the browser experience today, you might get some weird prompts about cookies, and it might look like a third-party cookie because the app is different from the IDP, and you might get some weird prompts from the browser of which the mobile developer has no control over. And so it's really hard to control the user experience if you're going to pop out to the browser. And I might add one other little piece of non-technical insight, but sometimes the product people are more powerful than the security people.
Yeah,
So
it's a tug of war there. It's not easy. Yeah, so the product wants a seamless user experience and make it easier and less friction on the user, right? And the security sometimes require a little bit of friction, and we need to find the right balance between those two, right?
okay. So Godwin, this spec which we're talking about, and maybe I could just quickly show it. Let me try and do that. It's called OAuth 2 for first-party native applications. It's a draft spec, which means I think it hasn't even been taken up by the working group yet. Rafat can correct me on the
Yeah.
exact terminology.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's at this stage. This is an individual draft, meaning that it holds the opinion of the authors, not the IETF. But we've been discussing this for some time, and I expect this to be adopted during the coming IETF meeting in Vancouver, or immediately after that officially, right? So it's coming. So
Yeah, and
there's
that's
a
at the
lot of
end of
interest.
July.
Yes, that will be July, end of July. Yes.
Right. And the three authors here, Aaron Parecki was previously a guest, and we actually discussed this on episode 15. We split the live stream between this first party and token revocation, and then George Fletcher from Capital One and Peter Kasselman from Microsoft. So it's got three guys who have a track record of doing some pretty good work with the IETF. So I think everyone's optimistic about this. And one takeaway from the meeting is that, or from the episode 15 live stream, is that this is a pretty easy spec. It's not like super complicated, and maybe actually I could show a different diagram, and Godwin, you can walk us through. Let's see. Let me try it. This one. Here we go. And Godwin, maybe you can walk us through what is this spec? How is it different from, let's say, hacking the token endpoint, or what does the spec actually tell us?
Yeah, so you rightly mentioned, so the when it comes to the specification, it's quite the simple. It's about how to get the token in a API centric way, right? So this spec has introduced a new the endpoint authorization challenge endpoint, where you can pass the required parameters like a client ID, scopes, etc. Ultimately, that particular endpoint may can challenge if you need to have the additional step of authentication, like let's say user enter credentials, and if the authorization server needs to enforce more authentication, there are error codes associated with the specification where the application needs to pass those the multiple steps. So ultimately what happens is this endpoints return a code, authorization code, or that is what you have the highlight on the step
Right.
2.
So step one is basically a multi-step process where we interact with the end user, a person,
Yeah,
probably, in
yeah,
n number of steps, multiple steps. And if there's more than one step, the spec defines a device session, some type of session correlation ID, so that when we get this request, we can correlate it with the previous step. So
yeah,
they introduced this like pre-authentication session called device session. Um, but then assuming the authentication is correct, is successful, then the end of this results in returning a code, as you mentioned,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then we present the code at the token endpoint, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the after that, the number 3, there won't be any changes with the existing node protocol. So the token endpoint will be remain as it is. So the one thing I need to highlight is this is on top of this, the specification, we can apply other extensions of the auth too. Like if you want to apply the depop on top of this, you have the flexibility to apply the depop, and if you want to apply the pixie on top of this, you have the flexibility to apply the pixie on top of this. Yeah,
Right, it layers in with the other OAuth specs, as I mentioned, because OAuth's not just one spec, it's actually a whole family of specifications and recommendations. Um, and Rafat, this is the title of the spec is first party, and I think that what do you have any thoughts on, or what does that mean exactly, and what are some of the limitations of it being first party and not third party?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there is even the title of that draft is talking about this, and this is really critical and important to understand is that we are really talking about first party applications only. So what does it mean? What does it mean that it's a first party? It just means that the owner or that domain, the authorization server, is the same owner of that application. So these are not completely different domains or different organizations that own the client and the authorization server, right? Which means, for example, a simple example is a bank with their mobile app to access the bank, right? So that's an example of a first-party application, right? Versus a third-party application, which the application could be completely different organization that is trying to access resources on a different domain and a different organization, right? So this is specifically talking about first-party application only, because the security properties of the third-party application is completely different.
And my take on it, at least at this point, is that if it's a third party app, we probably still want to use the browser.
Exactly.
yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the current state of the recommendation of the standard. So if you're talking about third-party app, stick with the current recommendations, right?
If you think about it at a simple level, if this first party authentication is password, then if it was used by a third party, the third party would see the password, and that's the whole point of like us centralizing authentication. So
Exactly.
even though these newer credentials aren't potentially as exposing as passwords, we're still going to treat them as potentially um, security or releasing it, too much security information.
Yep.
So Rafat, how does this actually this new I'm sorry, not Rafat, Godwin, this new spec actually help us build a better user experience,
Yeah.
and what do you see app developers doing with it?
Yeah. So I need to add into the what Rifat mentioned about the first party application thing. So in the protocol itself is there to server needs to confirm the first partiness of the application. So if you are implementing this, the first party application authentication, authorizations should have a way of confirming this is a first party application, not allowing every application to provide this native application. So that's the one thing. And along with that, we can think of more thing, like as example, not giving this option for DCR. So because if you look at the DCR endpoints, it's mainly about the third party application. So if you provide the native use experience, the capability to along with the DCR, that basically breaks the trustworthiness of this. Just wanted to highlight a couple of things what Rifat mentioned. Yeah.
Right. Um, if you're supporting dynamic client registration, just like other grant types, you might want to restrict
Yeah.
whether this is available by default by any anonymous client, because then they could phish the user for credentials potentially.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah, I have another diagram actually, which maybe I will bring up, because you mentioned that that this is happening in a larger part of a larger in sort of a number of transactions. But if you think about it, we start with a person downloading the mobile app from the App Store onto their phone. Then the app can register, and during registration, we need to present some type of proof that this is a first-party app. Otherwise, we don't trust it. My take on this is that proof should be some type of software statement, some type of JOT that allows you to your client to perform registration. But this isn't to say that we don't like the dynamic client registration. We still like dynamic client registration because that allows the creation of asynchronous keys. We want asynchronous secrets. We don't want shared secrets like client ID and secret. That's just like a password for the. So it's not that dynamic client registration itself is bad. It's just that you need to control dynamic client registration.
Yeah.
Godwin, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah.
I don't know how you handle it at WSO2.
Yeah, it's mainly about the concern we have seen. The DCR is mainly used by the third party applications, not the first party applications. So when it comes to the first party application, it's rare that, I mean, we haven't seen where the DCR endpoint is being used. So that's sort of a decision we took from our side, from the security concerns, not allow the first partiness or native application authentication for the application created by the DCR endpoints. So
Unprotected. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
would agree.
yeah. That's the thought behind the not allowing to the authenticate. Yeah,
We digress a little bit, but maybe Rafat, you could, if you have any thoughts on this idea. My take on it, just to be upfront, is I don't see why every client doesn't dynamically register, even if they're first party, because wouldn't we want to know all of the clients that we're interacting with? So I'm partial to this, but Rafat, you have more experience than I do with tons of implementations. What are you seeing about dynamic client registration adoption or wishes for that in the future?
Yeah, I didn't see like much, at least with the customers that we engaged with, much of adoption for the DCR, but I don't see a reason not to do it for first party application either, right? I think it's reasonable to do that, right? So
Yeah. So one way or another, you have to figure out how to secure your, whether you're going to pre-give. I mean, the other alternative is, I guess, you assign a client ID to mobile apps and they all use the same client ID. Every instance of that app uses the same client ID. And then they use Pixie, but Pixie, I would argue, is not client authentication. It just shows that you're doing the transaction through the same client, but it doesn't actually authenticate a specific client. So it seems like the alternative of not doing DCR is not doing client authentication, because then you're just you're not disambiguating between two clients. So there is no client authentication there. Maybe we digress. Okay. Godwin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the client authentication side, you're right. So the client authentication side, since this is a public client, there's a proper way of doing the client authentication. The what we implemented from our side is the app attestation. So we use Google app attestation services and also the Apple app attestation services. So which basically provides some sort of the client authentication, where the attacker won't be able to the intercept and pass the request to the authorization server.
And in fact, there's another proposed spec to use the attestation evidence produced by Google's Integrity API or Apple's Integrity API during dynamic client registration to associate the attestation evidence with a specific client ID. Rafat, are you familiar with that work at all, or the DCR with attestation?
So we have. I'm not sure exactly which one you're referring to, but
I can show you actually. So it's called the use of attestation in OAuth 2 dynamic client registration. This is also a 0.0 draft by Johannes, I think. I can show it on the screen. Yeah, so I think replace screen sharing window. Yeah. So this one. So it's a little tricky doing the screen sharing. Yeah, the use of attestation in OAuth 2 dynamic client registration. So this says at the time you issued the client ID, then you take that attestation information, and that way you have a relationship between the attestation and the client, and then the client proves that they're actually related to that attestation. But you could see how this is all kind of related to the mobile app, because it's not just that the mobile app is doing first-party authentication. First, we have to establish that we really trust this app. And so the use of the Integrity API and I think the client registration to establish a cryptographic secret helps us establish a chain of custody with the installation of the app and the environment.
I remember this draft. This was discussed once or twice, and again, this is still an individual draft, but yeah, like it's an interesting work, and hopefully we'll see it adopted. But it's still an individual draft at this point, right?
Okay, so let's assume that we have the app registered now, or a client ID associated, and it's calling this auth endpoint. One of my thoughts is that, well, now that we can put the user through a multi-step process and the authorization challenge endpoint, potentially we could tie in passkeys to the mobile app. I don't know, Godwin, if you had any thoughts about that, or how that could help user experience and security.
Yeah. So from WSO side, how we have designed and thought about it is like there can be multiple authentication mechanism behind how users authenticate. It can be username, passwords. It can be TOTP, multi-factor authentication, or fast keys, etc. That is, you can have any type of authentication that is totally decoupled with the protocol itself. So
True.
yeah, so that's how we have designed. I'm not quite sure, like the Aaron in the last the conversation, he was talking about some sort of the communication happened to take the pass key also into this specification. I'm not quite sure about that particular part, but that is how we have think about that one, Mike. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that sort of excites me about this opportunity is that, passkey APIs are built into the Android and iOS operating, or sort of, you can build them directly into your app themselves. And this means that using this first-party API, the first step could be an enrollment, or it could be optionally an enrollment if you have no passkeys. And then once you have a passkey enrolled, then to passkey authenticate, you're just presenting a biometric. So now using first-party authentication, we're able to, boot up an app, associate a passkey with it during my first time using the app, and then when I go back to the app, use my biometric modality to authenticate. And then I think passkey is kind of cheap. Because normally, Rafat said before, you have to add friction to get more security. And weirdly, by putting functionality in the hardware, I would say that passkeys have gotten away with something where we're getting better security and better usability at the same time, which doesn't seem like it should be possible.
Yeah, less friction for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know, Rafat. I know passkeys is still, what I'm finding is that the adoption is in the browser space is challenged because of a lot of changes in the browsers is making it hard to predict what the usability was. But maybe the mobile apps is a more controlled environment. So maybe there's an opportunity for mobile apps and passkeys to really create a better, more secure user experience. Any thoughts on overlap with passkeys?
Yeah, I think, like passkeys are getting more popular, and everybody's talking about passkeys. And as you mentioned, they provide a really superior security and user experience too. Like so you're able to provide a more secure interaction and less friction to the user. I think with mobile app, because you control it, like as the developer has more control over it, I guess it makes more sense to kind of see if you can, especially in this case, right? If you can introduce that and integrate it into this type of a solution, that would be reasonable or a good kind of approach to enhance the security and the usability and the user experience, right?
Well, let's pivot back to the protocol a little bit. So now we've gone through our authorization phase. Maybe we've registered credentials, and we have our code. So at the token endpoint, nothing has changed. What's the advantage of that exactly? Why don't we want to hack the resource owner password credential grant? Any thoughts, Godwin, on what were the usability or just security or just in general operational challenges of hacking the token endpoint, and what's the advantage of keeping it all the same?
Yeah, so we think it as a the good thing to keep as it is, right? Rather than changing, to adapt it to the same standards and the existing implementation. That is something we see as a company. If you want to provide the securities, I think we have to apply the existing security mechanism. So basically apply the depop around if you want to secure the token. That is how we have seen, like the using the existing same implementation is a good thing. That is what we have seen.
So this just layers on top of what you've already have for OAuth better. I
Absolutely.
think is maybe it's not that hacking the resource owner password is so bad, but yeah, this just provides, I think, a more common way to do it. I had another follow-up question on that. Okay, so I'm an app developer, and the question for app developers, like they're hard to change. Like once they decide to do something, it's really hard to get them to change. What does OAuth offer them that would actually be better than what they're doing now? Like how do we convince app developers that, yeah, they really should use OAuth? It's 10 times better than what they're doing now. Is there a case to be made for why this is so much better than what they're doing?
Yeah, I think.
Go
Go ahead,
ahead.
Gudrun. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Rifat.
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons. First, we're talking about a standard that is well defined and well known in the industry. So even if you're talking about first party application, that standard went through lots of reviews from different experts, especially from a security perspective. So it would be better for the developer to use something that has been reviewed and proven in the industry instead of building some proprietary type of solution. So that's the reason like a standard body like this exists to do all of this work, hard work for you, and then instead of you reinventing the wheel, right? So that's I think the reason for strongly suggesting people use those mechanisms that defined by a standard body, especially a standard body like the IETF, right?
I mean, that's always true, but that might be a hard sell to developers who are inclined to believe that they have thought of a better solution. I don't know, Godwin, do you see any other advantages of using this approach for if you're a developer?
Yeah, I'm also agreeing with the the Rifat. So ultimately this specification will be a RFC, and the community will start adapting with that, and around that there will be ecosystem. The people will create the SDKs, etc. So that will motivate developers to they use this specification, right? So that's our understanding as well. And the other thing is, so authorization servers also have the flexibility to give some developer friendly features along with this. So that is something we did, like as example, when we build this, when we implement this, we provide some sort of a feature where when the authentication flow changes happen, you don't need to change the application. If app developer the adapting to this particular the messaging mechanism with the authorization server properly, we can anytime change we can orchestrate the authentication flow where app doesn't need to change. So
Right.
there are some sort of developer side advantages as well, if we can adapt with this one. Yeah.
I think that that's true because you can implement especially things that don't impact the interface in the background. Like let's say maybe we have a new fraud detection API and we're going to call that during login. And you can do that without impacting the application at all. So I think that's true. Although this seems to be almost a middle ground because the application is first party, your changes may have impact on the interface actually. So I think it's somewhere between, in an OpenID web flow, the developer really doesn't know anything about the flow. He just redirects and gets a callback. But in this flow, maybe it's somewhere in between. You might get some central control where you can do some things but you might also, tell the developer, oh, we need a FIDO attestation at this point in order for you to proceed, in which case you're going to have to call a certain API. So I think that's compelling. Maybe also developer productivity. They don't have to define their own API. Um, and just the idea that I think the security department, their CISO does want to be involved in this. And so maybe it creates an interface more where the CISO can't win the argument in UX, but if I could let the developers handle the UX, and then I can actually have some say in this process and implement, some security and review. But as long as it's out of my hands, because I'm not a UX guy, I'm a CISO, then maybe it's not ideal.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. I do have a question for you guys as implementers because you both implemented this specification. So, my question is like, did you encounter any challenges with the specification when you try to implement the specification, and what were those challenges?
I'm willing to take it. We have implemented it, but we have not rolled it out to any customers yet.
Okay.
So it's a very, very new feature in the product, a very new endpoint, and we're building demo products against it right now. We have another demo project called Jan's Chip, which uses this API and enrolls FIDO credentials and sort of shows like the whole flow. And then we plan to promote that as a pattern for development. But it's a very easy endpoint to implement. So I'd expect a lot of vendors to add this one really quickly. And I said this on my show when I had Aaron on the show. I sort of was kicking myself not for thinking of it because it's such a good solution and it's so easy. I don't know why we hacked the token, the resource owner password credential grant, which I would say is not really that. It's not that it's unsecure. It's just really that it's really one-off. Like we had to insert our own state into the resource owner password credential grant, and we had to sort of like take this very asynchronous oriented token flow and make it somehow stateful, create state in order to do these we had to do backflips to do this. So in our implementation experience, it was a piece of cake to implement it, and but we're advocating for it, but I haven't seen customers using it yet. I don't know, Godwin, if you have any thoughts on this yet. It's very new. It's a 0.0 draft.
Yes. So from our side, when we start implementing this, we started looking at the specification, and the specification also started changing slightly. So initially, if you look at the specification, it started with the response mode, which is not having a specific endpoint. It started with the response mode. So then introduce the new endpoint. So we actually, in our implementation, we started with the response mode, something like response mode equal direct, etc. So we waited for the specification, and specification changes happen. So there's some sort of a challenges we had, and the other challenge is how to adapt with our existing framework. So we already have the authentication framework we built when the user authentication happened. So we wanted to basically align with the existing framework without doing any changes, drastic changes. So those are some of the challenges we had, Rifat. I need to highlight. Yeah.
Awesome. Do you have any suggestions, and that's the question for both of you, and any suggestions for enhancing that draft? Is the draft missing something, or is that the draft kind of got something wrong, or something like could be made clearer? Any thoughts on those?
Well, the right place, and this maybe it's a chance for you to pitch the OAuth working group, but probably the right place for us would be to get the engineers who actually did it. And I have to say, I get to input, but I don't get to actually do a lot of coding these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably, so the IETF is an open working group of individuals, not corporations. And the right place to input that would be the email mailing list for this, or to go to the working group meeting in Vancouver in July. I don't think we had a ton of feedback on this one. I think, what Godwin said about the spec's going to change, I expect. Like, I think Aaron said that the current device session, it's called, but they might change the name of that. So we're expecting a little bit of changes along the way from draft through the final process. But the basic idea that you're going to, there's a new back channel code flow that's only usable by first parties. That's something that I think we like. And but I don't know. It has been. It really is a pretty small spec as these things go. But if we do have any ideas, then we would put them on the list.
Awesome.
Have the
Yeah.
engineers put them on the list. I know,
Perfect.
Godwin, did you have any? Do you guys
Yeah.
have any suggestions on this? How to make it better?
Yeah. So one thing I saw is there's a specific section in the for the SSO, like where it is written in auth session ID, kind of a session ID, where multiple apps can share that ID and have SSO. At the same time, there's another specification there's another draft specification for the native app SSO.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some overlap on that particular area. So that's something I'm not fully aware how to which one to the cover, and which particular area is covering which specification. That's some sort of a the doubt I have. And the other one is it'll be good to mention the logout um, side. As I know, there are the standard logout mechanisms, OpenID Connect, session management, etc. But still, along with the authentication, I think it'll be good to specify that in the specification itself, and maybe refer to the particular specification. That's what I have.
One area where I think I have a little bit of confusion is, so what is an OpenID Connect authentication? If I request scope OpenID and I get back an ID token, is that an OpenID Connect authentication? I know this is outside the scope of the IETF OAuth working group, but it's important to me because my understanding was initially that an OpenID Connect flow is a web flow. And the OpenID spec, I think if you look through it, some of the response types and some of the things are missing. And I'm wondering sort of what is the overlap? If I get back an ID token, if I request the OpenID scope, what's the relationship between this new spec, between an ID token that I obtained through a first channel authent flow and a web flow? Those are two different types of ID tokens. Maybe it's reflected in the ACR that happened, but I just wonder about, maybe it's semantics, but I wonder about, was this actually an OpenID Connect flow that happened?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I'm hoping that Aaron is listening. So and he will take that into consideration. Good feedback, guys. Yeah, awesome.
Well, we're coming up to the end, and maybe Rafat, do you have any final thoughts? And we'll give Godwin the last final thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. First, yeah, like I just want to remind everyone that this is really specifically talking about first-party application. So make sure that you implement it only for first-party applications, and still keep using the existing mechanism for third-party applications. Another thing is, this is still an individual draft, but we expect this to be adopted soon or soonish, maybe end of July, early August. And keep in mind, it might change, and it will probably change because it's gonna go through a very long list of reviews at the OAuth work group, and later at the wider IETF community, right? And the last one, I want to thank you guys for doing this implementation very early in the process, because this helps us, the OAuth work group and the stand-up body, get it right. So we discover issues, we improve the standard based on your experience. So I encourage you and all implementers to go to the OAuth work group mailing list and participate, and subscribe and participate, and provide feedback to help us kind of get it right and get it the best shape it could be, right?
Godwin, last thoughts. You're our third guest or alumni from WSO2, so thank you. But any last thoughts on first-party user experience?
Yeah. So the first thing is, as Rifat mentioned, so we are also, the encouraging to have the right security in place. Don't compromise the security. So there are different security mechanism we can apply on top of this protocol in the first party applications. Make sure to have those security in place. And if identity providers, authorization servers are implementing, please make sure to build the SDKs once the specification completed, so mobile developers won't do any mistakes. That's what we are looking for. And I have to mention, we are so excited about this specification, and we are keeping eye, and we are, the continuously trying to participate, the working community, the group discussions, and trying to adapt it to the, the specification as much as possible. Yeah.
Oh, I just want to bring attention to what Godwin said there. I can say we talked about what are the advantages of using something like OAuth over just writing yourselves, and the availability of third-party libraries is a huge advantage for adopting open standards. So you don't have to build your own client libraries; you just grab your Ruby or JavaScript libraries. So that's a very, very good point. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I'd like to ask our audience to follow Identirati Office Hours on LinkedIn. That really helps us. We're trying to get to 1,000 followers. You'll get exclusive Identirati event notifications, so please follow. Next Thursday rather, we're going to be talking about how without the right data, we can't make the authorization policies we need, and how as enterprises we can get the plumbing right, so we can get our new policy engines the data that they need to make good decisions. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rafat and Godwin, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.